And I'm going to go ahead and start the webinar and let people join.
Okay.
We're now live. I'd like to welcome everyone as you're joining our webinar. We're just going to wait a minute and let everybody log on before we start. It's a beautiful afternoon, so thanks to everyone for joining. Again, for those of you that are just joining us now, we'll be starting in about 1 minute. We're just letting people log on to the webinar. We'll be starting in just about 30 seconds. Good afternoon. My name is Charlotte Wood. I'm the Assistant Library Director at the Wilmington Memorial Library. Today's program, The Truth About Chronic Illness, is being held in conjunction with the Flint Memorial Library in North Reading, the Tewksbury Public Library, and Memorial Hall Library in Andover. I would like to welcome patrons of each and anyone else who has joined us today. Please use the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen, to pose any questions, and we will get to them during the program. You do have the option of choosing to send your question to just the presenter. You don't have to send it to all if you would like it to be private. So you can double check the settings before you chat so that you can see the options that you have. Our presenter, Julie Morgenlender, is the editor of the recently published book, The Things We Don't Say, an anthology of chronic illness truths. And as someone who's lived with chronic illness herself, she will speak about how we define chronic illnesses and how they differ and overlap with disability and the truths of people's experiences. I have read many of the accounts in the book, and all have helped to give me a better understanding of the day-to-day struggles, both emotional and physical, that people with chronic illness face. I would like to thank Julie for compiling this book, knowing how much time and effort it took. So welcome, Julie, and thank you for speaking today.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone who's watching this either live or later on. I always appreciate so much when people want to learn more about chronic illness, whether you yourself have chronic illness or a loved one, or maybe you just want to know more in general. So I'm glad that you're all here, and I do hope you'll ask a lot of questions. I love taking questions, so please put them in the chat box at any point today, and there will be specific time at the end for questions, but you don't have to wait. So my name is Julie. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a person with multiple chronic illnesses and disabilities. And I think it's very important to say that up front. It's not something everybody is comfortable saying about themselves publicly, and if you're not, that's fine. There's no pressure. I've had symptoms since childhood, since elementary school, but I didn't receive my first semi-correct diagnosis until I was 23. And then I continued to receive more diagnoses, getting closer and closer to figuring out the full picture of what was going on with me until even through into my 30s. So it's been a really long journey. It's common to have multiple chronic illnesses because once one thing in your body gets out of whack, then other things might get out of whack. The body is very resilient and really amazing, but it is also a very delicate machine. So that can happen. And we'll get a little bit into why there's some stigmas around that. I also do other things. I crochet, I play the ukulele, I spend time with the people I love. I am a complete person. And so often we see somebody who has a chronic illness or disability or both and define them by that. Oh, it's my friend with multiple sclerosis. It's my coworker in a wheelchair. But we're full people, and it's very important to remember that. And it's important for us to remember that ourselves, because sometimes these things feel very all-consuming. And it's important to remember all of these other pieces of us, even if some of those pieces are things we can no longer do or that have had to change in some way. We still need to remember that. So as Charlotte mentioned, in addition to those things, I am also the editor of the book, Things We Don't Say, an Anthology of Chronic Illness Truths, which is this, get one without my notes on it, this beautiful book right here. I love the cover, which you can see is the shape of a face made up of thorns. So the outline is made of thorns for those who can't see it. And I think that the designer just came up with the best concept because it very visually shows what so many of us are living with. I'm going to put in the chat box some links to places where you can find the book, both as a paperback and an ebook. I know the Wilmington Library has a copy of the paperback. I don't know which libraries you're all coming from. I know one person said they're coming from Framingham. You can always ask your library to get a copy if they don't have it already. It is available as a book and an ebook. So what we're going to do here today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a chronic illness is and what a disability is and how they overlap and how they're different. I'll read a few short passages from the book, and then we'll have a Q&A. So you can start thinking about those questions. And like Charlotte said, feel free to ask a question anonymously if you don't want to do it publicly. Just put it in the chat box, and from the drop-down menu, address it only to the host, and we will read it out without any names. Okay, so let's get started here. What counts as a chronic illness? Oh, I've been asked this question a lot in a lot of different contexts, but especially for the book. So an anthology is a collection of stories. These are written by different authors. So I put out a call for writing and asked people to submit their stories. And so many people said, does this thing I have count as a chronic illness? And I found that so disturbing, that there is so much doubt, and we as a community have received so much disbelief and doubt that we're questioning what, quote, counts as a chronic illness. I always tell people, define it for yourself. If you think it counts, then it counts. And I could say that for the book. There are legal definitions, and those are going to vary from country to country for various reasons. In the United States, the definition is often used to determine disability benefits. And so it is not strictly a medical definition. And when you speak to doctors, there are definitions, but they've changed over time. But when you think about it, a chronic illness is an illness that is chronic. It is not short-term. It is not going away quickly. It's going to continue. So you can just keep that chronic piece in mind. There are many kinds of chronic illnesses, more than I could name right now. Some of the better known ones are things like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, but there are so many. And we are learning more, coming up with more diagnoses all the time. Then a lot of people want to know, are chronic illnesses and disability the same? And they're not, actually. I know a lot of people think they are. They're actually not. So a disability, sort of in the name, it's about what you are and are not able to do. And that isn't easily defined. For example, I'm able to walk up a flight of steps today. Another day, I might not be able to walk up a flight of stairs, and it depends on how I am feeling that particular day. So some disabilities are like that. It is because my chronic illnesses vary in severity over time. For me, my disabilities are a result of my chronic illnesses, but that's not always the case. You can easily have one without the other. For example, if you are in some sort of an accident, like a car crash, you might become disabled without having any other sort of illness that's associated. On the other hand, you can have chronic illness without being disabled. And I fell into that category for many years. My disabilities developed over the years due to deterioration in my body from the chronic illnesses over time. And again, that doesn't happen to everybody. It's important to remember too that disabilities can be a lot of different things. I know a lot of people think of a disability as a person in a wheelchair, and that is it. But that's just one way that somebody might appear to be disabled. There are some disabilities that are more visible and some that are less visible. We sometimes call them invisible disabilities. We also sometimes talk about invisible chronic illnesses. So for example, right now, looking at me, this would be an example right here of someone with invisible illnesses and invisible disabilities, right? I look fine. And right now, I do look fine. However, if you then saw me standing up in the summer when I'm wearing shorts or shorter skirt, you'd see that maybe I'm wearing supports around my knees. But in the winter, no one can see them. And so that makes that aspect a little bit more invisible. I also personally believe that there are very few situations where the illness or disability is completely invisible to those who know the person well. So for example, one day I was on a video chat with my mom, and she just looked at me and said, "Oh, you're not feeling well today, are you?" And I asked how she knew, because I thought I looked okay. And she said, "I can see it in your eyes." Normally my eyes look probably like they do today. There's a bit of a spark, but when my symptoms are bad and I'm in a lot of pain or a lot of fatigue, there's more of a dullness, and a stranger's not going to notice that, but somebody close to me might. Or you might notice a loved one wince with pain, right? Or just look very disappointed when they can't do something. And so those are more subtle ways that you can pick up on these so-called invisible illnesses and disabilities. And it takes some time. I know as somebody who experiences them, I can now see these signs in others better than I could before. I don't expect anyone to recognize that in me, but if you have a loved one with chronic illnesses and disabilities, you might want to pay attention and just look for some of those signs. So anyway, as I was saying, chronic illnesses and disabilities, picture a Venn diagram. They're each their own circle, but then they overlap. So for example, you can have somebody with multiple sclerosis who has a chronic illness, and they're in the chronic illnesses can be relapsing remitting. So you can have symptoms and then they go away, and they come back and they go away. So if they're in one of those remitting stages where they're not experiencing symptoms, then they might not be disabled. But then those symptoms might come in more. Maybe now they do have an issue that does cause them to be disabled. And I was talking about how there are different forms of disabilities. So it could be somebody who's in a wheelchair. And a lot of wheelchair users are not in the wheelchair all the time. You might see someone stand up from a wheelchair. That's perfectly normal. It happens plenty. People might use a wheelchair not because they're paralyzed, but because they experience such pain or fatigue or dizziness or other symptoms, and they need that wheelchair to help them get around due to those symptoms. It could be hearing impairment. It could be a visual impairment. It could be pain in joints that limit mobility in some way. Even if we're not talking about wheelchair, there are other ways mobility could be impaired. There are just so many ways that someone could be disabled that go beyond the stereotypical symbol that we see in parking places, right, of the stick figure in the wheelchair. So just to, keep that in mind as we go through this, and I'll be referencing some of those situations when I get to some of the readings. And again, if you have questions about any of this, please ask. I want this to be a place you can ask all those questions. Maybe you've been too embarrassed to ask other people, because chances are I've heard it already or something similar, and you're not going to upset me. So go ahead and ask those questions. Okay, I'm going to talk for a second about some of our experiences. I say our, people with chronic illnesses. So a big one is stigma. There's the impression that you could use that word. Sometimes we're told we're being lazy when we're not doing something, or if we're not working full time. That's not true. A lot of people with chronic illnesses are working harder than anybody knows just to get through our day to day. I know for me personally, the amount of time that I spend just keeping track of medications and medical exams and doing physical therapy exercises and researching medical treatments, and it's a lot. And I have fewer hours in the day that are what you might think of as usable hours than most people because of my symptoms. And they do mean that I have to rest a lot during the day. So for example, this presentation is the thing I am doing today. I would not have scheduled anything else today because I know I can't do it. Talking to you for an hour, that is the energy that I have for the day. And that's okay. That's what I'm choosing to do. It's not about laziness. It's about ability, and everyone's abilities are just a little bit different. There's a lot of misunderstanding. You might hear the name of a diagnosis and think, oh, you know what that is because a famous person was diagnosed and you read about what they went through. Or you know what it is because it was on a TV show or you read a news article once. But it's really hard to understand any of this fully unless you've lived it. And it's really important to remember that everyone's experience is different. So you could know 3 people with fibromyalgia and each of them is experiencing it in a different way. They each have different symptoms with different severities. Maybe one is able to work full time and another can't work at all. So it's not a situation where you meet one person with a condition and now you understand everybody. A lot of us, this is common, unfortunately, a lot of us spend a long time searching for our diagnoses. I mentioned that for me, it took more than a decade. It was actually more like 2 decades to really be piecing things together. And that is on the longer side. I don't remember the last statistic about on average how long it takes someone to get diagnosed, but it is in the years category. We're not talking weeks or months, but it's generally years. And when you are experiencing something to your body, we each only get the one body. And when your body is not working or it's sending you signals that are so painful or exhausting or whatever they might be, and you don't understand them and the doctors can't help you, let me tell you, a month is a really long time. So when it goes on for years, you can imagine it's that much longer. So unfortunately, that's an experience that a lot of us have. I have noticed that a lot of people with mental health and physical health issues have similar experiences with a lot of these. So there are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. And the book speaks about both. And some people, you can have one person who has both mental health and physical health, chronic illnesses, and that is in the book as well. So you can have one without the other in either direction, but you can also have both. And it's important for us to take care of all aspects of ourselves, right? Physical, mental, emotional. But again, the stigma, the misunderstanding, it comes in with both. But another thing we have in common is we need the support of our loved ones and we need compassion from other people. We need understanding. We need a loved one to step in and help us combat that stigma. When I go to a restaurant and I need to place, when I have gone to restaurants when it wasn't a pandemic, and I've placed an order where, let's face it, because of my issues, I have very specific dietary needs. If the serving person is rolling their eyes or acting like they're not taking it seriously, I don't necessarily need someone else to speak up for me, although in some cases that might be helpful for someone. But I need at least when I turn to my dinner companion and say, can you believe this? This is really difficult. I don't know if I can trust the food now. I need them to be understanding and not dismissive. So it's really important that you support your loved ones or coworkers or whoever you might be in contact with, because it's a hard road and we all need that support from others. Okay, so why a book then? I mean, there's a lot of material out there. There's videos and blogs. And I actually had a blog. I still have a blog. I've had a blog for a long time that I've written anonymously. But there's just a lot of stigma out there, as I said. And what I found is because of the stigma, a lot of times we don't talk about what we're dealing with. And then when we don't talk about it, the stigma gets worse because we're not speaking the truth to help combat that stigma, right? See how this goes? So I started thinking, what if we did talk about it? And I'm a big book person. So for me, a book really felt right. You know, it puts it in writing all in one place together. We talk about some things on my blog that were really private. I felt I could talk about because it was anonymous. And these were things that no one really spoke about. So I thought, maybe no one wants to hear it. And then those turned out to be the most popular pieces, with so many people saying, hey, me too. I also feel this way, and I wish more people would talk about it. So I started to see, okay, we need to talk about some of these things. And I thought about how many things are misunderstood, and I just wanted to bring more truth and clarity to those. I think that truth and knowledge can make a really big difference. And sometimes that means we need to talk about it or, write about it. There's also a problem in the chronic illness community where people feel really alone. It makes sense, right? Because we've got this thing people don't talk about, and it often causes people to be more isolated just in a logistical way, right? Where maybe they can't leave their house as easily, for example. So this is a way for people to feel a little less alone and maybe feel a little more understood. Plus, hopefully to help others understand. I mean, my dream is for someone to pick up the book and go to a loved one and say, hey, right here on this page, read this. This is how I've been feeling. And maybe it puts things into words a little better than they could themselves. So that's my hope. So there are 50 stories, all true, all nonfiction, by 42 different authors from 7 different countries. I wanted to have a range of experiences so that hopefully everyone can have something, more than one thing, that they can relate to. So the authors are different ethnicities, ages, races, gender identities, sexual orientations. They have different chronic illnesses, like I said, both mental and physical. And each of these personal essays includes the author's name and where they're located, and a short bio with them along with a headshot. So for those who can see, here's an example. Just so that, again, you can hopefully relate a little bit more to the people behind the words, because type on a page is great, but sometimes you just want that extra bit of connection where you can go, oh, they're from my country, or, oh, look, this person in their bio, they have the same hobbies or interests or whatever. So I think it's a great way to just connect a little bit more. I'm going to put in the chat box for those who can see. If you go to chronicillnesstruths.com, you can learn more about the book. But if you go in the About section, you can actually see all of the bios and headshots for the author. So if you want to get a sense of who's in the book, that's a really great way to do it. So right now it's an ebook paperback. I'm working on figuring out the audiobook. I don't know when that will be, but I'm working on it. And you can also sign up for the email list at chronicillnesstruths.com. If you want to get on the email list, then you'll know as soon as the ebook's available. And I send out updates just once a month, so not a big deal. A lot of people ask me how I did this while living with my own chronic illnesses. The short answer is it took a really long time. So I had this idea in my head for a while. I wanted to do this, but I decided to wait until my health felt a little bit more stable. And there were always ups and downs, but when those ups and downs got a little less extreme, I decided to go for it. And then it took me 6 years. And there were entire months where I didn't work on it. And okay, sometimes there was some procrastination, but mostly it was my health. When I sat down to read each of the essays that were submitted to me, I couldn't sit and read for 5 hours. I could read 2, maybe 3 essays in a day, and I received 150. So that took a while. Up until the end, I didn't work on it more than once a week, if that. At the end, I was putting in more time, and it was the only thing I was working on. My house became a mess. Nothing else in life was getting done. And that only lasted a few weeks, but it still exhausted me. Mostly it was taking my time. It was being upfront with everybody from the start, saying, this is going to take how long it takes. I promised myself from the beginning, I was not going to let my work on this book make my health worse, because for me, that was really important. And that worked for me. But I told that to everyone from the start, and it set those expectations. So then when it took 6 years to finish this book, no one was surprised. No one was annoyed. Well, maybe they were annoyed. They didn't tell me, but no one seemed to be annoyed. Everyone understood because, you know, most of the people involved have chronic illnesses or have loved ones with chronic illnesses. So they understood. At the back of the book, there's a bonus called How to Complete a Big Project While Living with Chronic Illnesses. So I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. And for those who aren't seeing the chat, it's chronicillnesstruths.com/bonus. And you can download that for free. Please enjoy it, use it. I hope that it helps. It's some things that I did that I found useful for completing this book while living with chronic illnesses, some things that I avoided, some things I wish I'd done differently. So I'm hoping that that will help. Again, put your questions in the chat box, please, if you have any. Okay, so I'm going to read a few quick passages, and I will look over at the chat box in between. So if you have questions about any of the pieces or anything else, you can put them in there. There is some profanity in the book, which I am editing out of these pieces as I speak, because this is, you know, being put in all kinds of places, and I don't want to cause problems for anyone. But just so you know, there's the occasional swear word in here, not a lot. Some of these stories are very positive, some are more negative, but a lot of them are intense. There's a lot of intensity. So just thought I'd give you a heads up as I get started here. Okay, so the first bit that I'm going to read is from a piece called This Is Hard, written by me. And I said, living with chronic illnesses is hard, very hard. That's the part no one wants us to talk about. Instead, society prefers to see us as inspirational. I hear that all the time. How inspirational I am that I am smiling and laughing when I'm happy, as if they expect me to be sad and crying all the time. How inspirational it is that I am helping a friend with a problem, as if they expect me to spend my days staring at a wall and not talking to anyone. How inspirational it is that I haven't given up, as if they expect me to have killed myself when things first got hard. And you know what? Hearing that is hard. I hate it when people tell me how inspirational I am just for living my life. If they want to compliment me for an actual achievement, like creating this book, that's great. But I am insulted and hurt when people tell me how great I am for continuing to live. Hearing platitudes is hard. I don't believe this happened for a reason. I don't believe some higher being has a special plan for me. I don't want to hear that a cure or treatment is, quote, right around the corner. I stopped believing that 20 years ago. I don't want someone else who has never experienced anything like what I live with every day telling me that they believe it's for the best. That doesn't help me. It only hurts. And I'm skipping ahead a bit in the piece here. Having to depend on others is hard. I have always been independent. I am thankful that I can still live on my own, but I question how long that will last. I hate having to ask for help, but there are many things that I simply cannot do. It's not a matter of willpower. Sometimes it's carrying something heavy. Sometimes it's using a hammer on a nail. Always, it's hard to rely on others. Making difficult medical decisions is hard. Should I take the medication that will cause infertility, the medication that will likely lead to brittle bones and cancer, or the medication that gave me panic attacks the last time I took it? That wasn't a fun choice, and certainly not an easy one either. I am constantly having to make difficult decisions that only I can make. I can ask for advice from doctors, friends, and family, but in the end, I am the one who must choose a treatment, a test, a doctor. And it's hard because the wrong choice could have dreadful consequences, and do-over is not an option. Being honest is hard. I spent my life pretending that things weren't as bad as they really were. The pain started when I was 12, lasting for weeks or months before going away, only to one day return again. I learned at that time that if I talked about it too much, grown-ups stopped listening. When I was 16, the pain changed. It became more severe and also unending. I had pain 24 hours a day and learned quickly that I had to ask for certain accommodations, like note takers in class for when I couldn't hold a pen. But if I asked for too much, I would be questioned about ulterior motives. One doctor said I was making it up for attention. Another said I was imagining the pain and sent me to a psychologist. I spent my adult life not letting on how much pain I was in. I talked about it occasionally, but not often. When I said I couldn't do something, people often looked at me like I was making it up, exaggerating, or just being difficult. That still happens, and that's super hard in and of itself. I'm going to skip ahead again a little bit. Living with the guilt is hard. There's the guilt that I don't help others as much as I want to, the guilt that I no longer work full time, the guilt that I'm too sick to do so many things, the guilt that I'm not as sick as others, the guilt that I have to ask others for financial help, the guilt that I'm in a better financial situation than others, the guilt that I can't take care of myself 100%, the guilt that I can take care of myself better than so many others, the guilt that I can't leave the house every day, the guilt that I can leave the house at all when so many others can't. I grew up with Jewish guilt, but chronic illness guilt is so much harder. And I'll skip ahead again. Yes, living with chronic illness is hard. I still find happiness and joy in life, but I wonder sometimes if those who aren't as close to me, who don't hear me talk about the hardest parts, see the happiness and joy and don't realize just how hard it is too, because it is. This stuff is hard. That's why I need to focus on and appreciate the days that aren't quite as hard, because those better days are the times that pull me through, even when they're hard. So I touched on many of the things I discussed earlier, like stigma and not being understood, being doubted. The next piece I'm going to read from is I Am Not My Cornea by Keirdra Cheney. And Keirdra wrote, even though I get sick of talking about my eye problem every day, I still do. I talk about it because it's my life every day. And if you ask me how I'm doing, this is a big part of it. But I also discuss it because I see a lot more people with chronic medical conditions really making a point to not live in the shadows, even as they are dealing with their illnesses. There's this dichotomy about illness, a dangerous one that exists in our society, where you are either 100% well or 100% sick. And if you're sick, then you stay out of view until you're 100% well again. And that's BS. A lot of us aren't 100% well, but we're fine and we're living our lives as best we can. Rather than living a false life to make others feel better, we tackle it full on, knowing there will be good days, great days, bad days, and awful days. But through it all, we are still ourselves. I am me and not defined by my keratoconus. I loved all of Keidra's piece and you should check it out. She makes an excellent point about people assuming you're either 100% sick or 100% well. And that feeds into a lot of those stigmas where you're being lazy, just get better. Oh, you say you don't feel well, just go to the doctor, get fixed. And for some of us, that's the chronic piece. The chronic piece is where it's not getting fixed. And so we are in that middle ground. Okay, next piece I'm going to read from is Chronic Pain versus Masculinity by Brett Stevenson. And let's see, Brett wrote, my ego is pretty bruised. I've had to pull my IRA retirement money for medical bills 3 times, leaving it empty with no cushion to fall back on. This creates a fear of failure more than a fear of poverty, the failure part of my clinging attempt to feel like a self-sufficient man. What I have learned through all of this is my masculinity, my manhood, must be malleable like my overall pride. They all become a luxury at a certain point, with necessity dictating when to bend and adapt. Part of my personal growth has been to stop fighting my back issues like a man, quote, should, and just let go of any expectations from my body. A local chronic pain group helps, but it took me months to swallow my male pride and walk through the door. The few guys who show, much outnumbered by women, have expressed many of the same feelings as their own personal abilities and dreams were altered by chronic pain. The strong male oak must become a flexible willow. Men do not have to take pain and challenges stoically, especially when they simply cannot. We must let go of all those age-old stereotypes and expectations. We need to not get angry when our friends complain of a sore back after golfing or hiking. It's a poor attempt to commiserate, but an attempt nonetheless. Using a cane or butt cushion is not a sign of weakness, just adaptation. Leaving a group early because you can't sit any longer is not a sign of weakness, nor is pulling the social plug completely some days to just try and get through the day and night. I have little to prove as a man at this point in my life. Rather, I've let go of my old manhood and masculinity dogma, and my new goal is to ride this out gracefully and hopefully with a sense of humor. I love the imagery there, right? The strong oak and the flexible willow. I think Brett did an amazing job. Okay. I'm going to read a piece from, I have two pieces in the book. This is my second piece, My Journey for Answers, because no one will care more about my health than me. So let's see. I will never be healthy. It has taken me a long time to accept that. Some days I acknowledge that reality with understanding and grace. Other days I whine, cry, and lament. Why me? But I know that no matter how I feel about it, it's my reality. I cannot change the fact that I will never be healthy, but I can continue to work towards feeling less sick. In small ways, it's working. This book has taken me 6 years to publish. Some of that delay was due to life getting in the way or procrastination, but most of it was health related. I've had to work on this book in increments of just 1 to 2 hours because I can't manage more than that in a day. I have tried to work part-time jobs from home more than once, and each time I got sicker. On the other hand, my gastrointestinal issues, which sometimes had me curled in a ball on the bathroom floor, seriously wondering if death might not be so bad, have improved drastically. I haven't had a migraine in several years. My joint pain is bad, but more days than not, it's what I consider to be manageable. My fatigue is bad, but less bad than it had been. I celebrate every improvement, no matter how small. Improving my health is an ongoing process that I will struggle with for the rest of my life. It is not easy. Some days I question if I can do it, but I know that for me, there is no choice. This is hard stuff, and I won't lie about that. But I push through, and I am grateful for the improvements that I have found, even while I struggle constantly. I'm going to skip ahead a bit. Chronic illness is exhausting because, after all, it is chronic. There is no getting away from it. I want to take a vacation from my health, to get away from it all for a few days, but that's not possible. In fact, travel makes things even more difficult, and I feel worse for many days after even a short trip. And there's no getting away from the discrimination, the stereotypes, or the lack of accessible spaces. I can't get rid of my chronic illnesses, but I'm doing the best I can to deal with them and to make it as bearable as possible. After all, what are the alternatives? So those are my readings. I could read from the book happily all day, but I'm going to leave it there. Like I said, I know there's some intense things there. I'm hoping some of you were maybe nodding with understanding, though, maybe feeling like, okay, it's not just me. I know I had that feeling when I read a lot of these pieces, and I've heard from others who felt the same way. I think it's really important to acknowledge just how universal some of these feelings and experiences can be. So, like I said, it can be intense, but I think these have a lot of value. If that resonated, please put a note in the chat box. Just let me know. Now is an excellent time for questions. So anything that you've been thinking of about something I said or something completely unrelated to what I said, but still in the world of chronic illnesses, please put that in the chat also. And if you have any questions you want to ask anonymously, you can just send those to the host, and either Charlotte or I will see them and we'll read them anonymously. Okay, so someone said it does resonate. I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that. I think you know what I mean. I'm sorry that it needed to resonate, but I'm glad that you felt like it expressed something you could relate to. And I've been asked, how did I select the stories for the book? So like I said, I put out a call for writing. I put out calls on social media and some other places, and it was slow at first, but eventually I got a lot of submissions. And I wasn't quite sure what to expect going in, but I knew some subjects I wanted to touch on. I knew I wanted to have discussions about treatment of medical offices, support from loved ones, things like that. So there were very specific topics I wanted to touch on. Some of the pieces were very clear to me, and some were less clear, just based on maybe how well something was written, how authentic it was, how deep it was. I wanted pieces that really touched on the reality of chronic illness, and not just skimming the surface. So that was very important. And like I said, I wanted to have authors who represented a range of experiences and backgrounds. So in the end, if I had two pieces that spoke very similarly on the same topic, I would try to only choose one because I did want that variety. So it was difficult. There were, let me tell you, many spreadsheets. I'm a spreadsheet girl, many spreadsheets, and it took a really long time. It was hard because I wanted more. There were so many pieces that I wanted to include, but I felt it was important that the book wasn't too long, that it would be overwhelming. I was really specifically aiming for something on the shorter side. I mean, it's not super short. You know, you can see there's some heft to it, including the index at the back. You know, but there's still a decent amount, but I didn't want a 500-page book. Somebody asked, do the stories in your book describe each person's chronic illness? Some yes, some no. It depends on the topic. There are some pieces that never mention the illness at all by name. Some just reference symptoms or feelings or situations, and some will specifically list out diagnoses and what those diagnoses mean to the person. So it just depends on the subject. How do I support my partner with chronic illness on his hardest days? You ask him. And I would ask him on his better days too. I mean, you can ask him on his hard days, what do you need? But it can be really hard in the moment to know what we need. I mean, you can think about when you've had a really bad fever, for example, or flu or something, and your head is sort of fuzzy and you just don't even know. It can be really hard to know what will help. So on our better days, it's good to think it through. So for example, for me, I know that when I feel sick, when I say sick, I mean my symptoms are flaring, so not traditionally sick. I know I'm going to need food that is already made. At any time, I have food in the freezer that I can defrost because I live alone and I won't be able to prepare meals. I know I'm going to need bland foods, so I make sure I have some of those. I know my brain won't be working at its best, and I'm going to need to watch movies and TV shows that I have seen a million times, and I don't mind if I zone out in the middle. So I have those always saved. They're in my Netflix queue, on my TiVo, on DVDs even, just in case. So I know these are things that are working for me, and I have certain people I know I can reach out to and say, I'm having a really hard day. Please check in on me, or please distract me with cute dog photos, because that's what works for me. So you might ask your partner if any of this is maybe ringing a bell. Does it trigger any ideas of what he may need that might help him? Everyone's situation is going to be different. I know one of the most helpful things for me, I was at home watching TV with somebody who I was dating at the time. And he just looked at me at one point and said, "You're really not feeling well, are you?" I was like, "I'm not." And he just held my hand. And that was it. And that's what I needed. I didn't need at that point for someone to say, "Let me help you," because there was nothing to be done. What I needed was support, and for no one to expect me to talk, because I'm a talker, but when I really don't feel well, I don't have the energy to speak. And so that's what I needed in that moment, was someone to hold my hand. So just ask him what he needs. Okay. Oh, you're welcome. So somebody said, it's hard to make plans as symptoms can change in a short period of time. May feel fine sitting down to dinner, but within half an hour must lie down due to spine problems. Yeah, so that unpredictability has been something I've struggled with a lot. I used to have a bit of a spontaneous nature that I feel I've had to give up a lot of because of my chronic illnesses. I can't just say, "Hey, let's go on a random day trip," because first I have to see, will there be any restaurants where I can even get food? And if not, I'm going to have to spend time bringing food. I have to pack up my medications. I have to pack up all these different things, right? I can't randomly spend the night someplace because I won't have my medication with me. It's that lack of spontaneity is actually something you'll find discussed a lot in chronic illness circles, and it's hard. There are ways to adapt for it, especially when you find the same situations being triggering over and over. And so you find ways of adapting and of preparing not only yourself in advance, but the people you're with, and saying, yes, I want to go out to dinner with you, but let's call the restaurant ahead and make sure we can reserve a booth with a bench so that I can lay down on the bench when I need to. A friend of mine with back pain does that. She brings a mat with her everywhere she goes so she can lay down when she needs to, even on a floor. But when she goes to a restaurant, they always have a booth with a bench so that she can lay down. It's not convenient. And it's hard, especially if you're somebody who wants to just blend in and not stand out. But on the other hand, it allows her to do things she couldn't otherwise do. And I hope you can find ways that work for you so that you can still go out and do these things. Someone asked, how can I find a chronic illness support group? Okay, great question. That kind of thing comes up a lot. So I don't know of a universal answer. I got lucky to find a chronic pain support group where they had posted in a local listserv, and a friend saw it and sent it to me and said, you should check this out. And it was the best thing I could have done at the time. But I wouldn't have known if my friend hadn't shown me. So I think maybe letting people in your life know you're on the lookout for a chronic illness support group would be helpful. But beyond that, I would ask your doctors, especially any specialists. Like for me, I have given the flyer for my chronic pain group to my rheumatologist, and she has passed it on to her patients. So ask your doctors and your hospital, if your hospital has a chronic pain center or anything like that, ask them. They might offer something or at least know of something. Check with your local libraries. Ours isn't run through the library, but it does take place there. And I have heard of that happening in other places as well. They might know of something. Libraries are amazing resources, people. So I would do that, but also go online and look in chronic illness online groups. So for example, I'm in several Facebook groups related to specific chronic illnesses, but also chronic illnesses as a whole. You have to find what works for you. Right? My celiac group might not work for you if you don't have celiac disease. You might join a lupus group, which I wouldn't be in since I don't have lupus. But in those groups, you might ask people if they've heard of anything. And especially right now, what's happening is things are opening up more. So for example, my chronic pain group, which is a local group to my area in Arlington, Massachusetts. I'm not in Arlington, but that's where the group is based. But now everything is on Zoom because of the pandemic. And there's a lot of discussion about keeping a portion of the group or all of the group, but at least some of the group online. We're not sure yet how that's going to go, but there will continue to be a virtual component because let's face it, we're a group of people who can't always leave the house. And before the pandemic, we were playing with ways to offer a video setup. So the pandemic pushed us to make it happen. And I say us only because I help with the tech, but I'm not the person running the group. So we are now accepting people from outside of Arlington because we have this ability now, right? So you can look online, look up Arlington Chronic Pain Support Group. I will try and grab the link. And you can come to, we have a meeting once a month, and it's just a chronic pain support group. But definitely, like I said, let your friends know if you're comfortable and go online, check Twitter hashtags, Instagram followers, really any place you can find online, assuming you all have internet access if you're watching this, and just see what you can find. And I really wish everyone luck because I know it can be hard to find these groups, but I also know how valuable they are. You can also start your own. If you're not looking for something with more of a therapy component that might be run by a social worker, but if you're just looking for a group of people to get together and talk, like the book club version, or the chronic illness version of a book club, you know, something like that, you could start your own if you feel able to do so. So, other questions? Anyone? I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm multitasking here and pulling up the link for that support group also, but I we'll get back to that because I see there's a question here. Using the quote 10 spoons analogy, how many spoons do I have in the drawer at the beginning of the day out of 10 possible? Today might be 10, tomorrow 5. Every activity will cost X amount of quote spoons. Maybe laundry takes 4 spoons and shopping takes 5. Therefore, I can do both today, 10, whereas tomorrow I can only accomplish one of the 2. Okay, I'm going to explain that because it makes perfect sense to me, but I know a lot of you are scratching your heads. Okay, so Christine Misanderando, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name right. She has a blog called butyoudon'tlooksick.com, and I highly recommend checking it out. So Christine wrote a blog post. One day she was sitting in a diner and her friend couldn't understand her limitations. And so she grabbed a bunch of spoons off different tables, and I'm paraphrasing out of memory, so you read it for yourselves, but grabbed spoons and told her friend, here's how many spoons you have to do things today. This is your energy or whatever. This is what you've got, your capacity. And each thing you do will cost a spoon. Let's walk through your day. And the friend didn't get very far before they ran out of spoons and realized this is how you are limited when you have chronic illness. So spoon theory has, and if you Google spoon theory, it will come up. Spoon theory is used a lot in the chronic illness community. It's a brilliant shorthand. I tell a friend, I'm running low on spoons. They get it. And for a lot of us, it just makes sense. And it's not a perfect analogy because you can't have half a spoon or, it. And I know for me, how many spoons I start out in the day isn't the best measure because I might start with 5 and then later have 6, but I'll never have 80. And so it's not perfect, but it actually does explain what we deal with in terms of limitations very well. This feeds well into the next question, which is how can you politely tell people you just don't feel up to doing something? Because, we don't always know how many spoons we're going to have in a day, what our capacity will be. I make plans for next Tuesday. I don't know how I'm going to feel next Tuesday. I don't know how I'm going to feel tonight. I might feel great at 6 o'clock and at 6:30 feel horrible. I can't predict that. And it makes it really hard to plan things, which goes back to that whole spontaneity issue. But how to politely tell somebody? Well, it's going to depend a lot on who the person is. The way you tell a spouse or a close friend is not how you're going to tell a coworker. And that's not how you're going to tell an acquaintance, right? So context is really going to be key on this. For people close to you, have them read spoon theory, have them read my book or a different book or a blog post or something so they can get a bigger understanding. So it's not just trying to understand what you're saying, but maybe understanding the bigger picture of the experience. But the other thing is, I find it helps to express my regret that I really wish I could do the thing. I would love to go, and I'm really disappointed that I can't, and I'm sorry I can't make it. Now, some people are going to be hurt or insulted or not understanding, no matter what you say. And frankly, there's only so much you can do to educate somebody, especially if they're not being open-minded. However, I think a lot of people, especially the ones that care about you, are going to try to be understanding. And if they act confused, I find it helps to say, you can ask me questions. Let me know what you don't understand, and I will be happy to try and explain it. And maybe I don't feel up to explaining it today, but could I maybe get back to you tomorrow if I'm feeling better? That kind of thing can really help. Be keeping those lines of communication open and letting people know they can ask you later. I know this is hard to understand. If you have questions, I hope you'll ask me. Think about it. You can come back to me anytime you figure out what your questions are. I want to be able to answer them. And just being genuine and honest, I find really helps. Now, that said, it's hard. I mean, we're putting ourselves in a position where we don't have much energy, and yet we're doing this hard work of explaining things to people when what we want to do is rest. And it's a lot of emotional work to do that. So you have to be taking care of yourself. You can't always be offering to answer questions. But for people you really are close to, answering those questions is going to give you years of a better relationship, years of not having to explain it. I don't have to explain to the people close to me why I can't show up for something. They just understand. And they'll often say, hey, I'm doing this thing. I know it might be a lot, but I hope you'll make it if you can. So because I've been open with them, because I've helped them understand it, it means I don't have to continue to explain it over time. Somebody asked, what approaches have proven successful in helping my partner understand my chronic illness and its limitations? So I don't know what approaches have proven successful. You might be asking what approaches could prove successful. And I think that it's going to depend a lot on, I should have given this disclaimer at the start. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, not a professional. Take it all with a grain of salt, people. Okay. It's going to depend a lot on your situation, your relationship. Is it that your partner is trying to understand but can't, or they're not trying? I think that's a really important distinction. If they're not even trying to understand, then you're going to have to start there and figure out why they refuse to try and understand. For a lot of people, it's fear. They're scared of losing out on the partner they were expecting to have. They're scared of believing this could happen to them. There's a lot of fear involved, a lot of denial. So you might need to figure out first why they're not willing to try. But if they're trying and they're stuck, a lot of it just takes time and continuing to do things like encourage them to ask you questions, have them read books, listen to podcasts, watch YouTube videos. I have seen some amazing content online. And if they're willing to understand and they just can't, then I would hope they'd be willing to listen to a podcast the next time they're washing the dishes and just be listening in the background and maybe try and understand a little bit more about chronic illness. Yes, you need them to understand your particular situation, but it helps if they're understanding chronic illness in general. And then once they get that understanding, then you can explain your specifics. Because the other thing is, I brought a loved one to my chronic pain group once, which was totally encouraged in the group. So that was fine. And at the end, they said, I never knew how many people had this. I always believed what you said about how you were badly treated by doctors, but I didn't realize that was so common with other people. And I was really struck by how many people had this. And I think that was really key. They weren't saying they didn't believe me. They did believe me, but they thought maybe my situation was just unique in some way. And hearing the same kinds of stories coming from a dozen other people made them realize, oh, wow, it's everybody. Or not everybody, but it's a lot of people. So I think that in that way, hearing from others, podcasters, bloggers, reading books can really help. And if you have a friend with chronic illness, I know if it were a close friend of mine, I'd be happy to speak to their spouse and say, okay, you can ask me questions you might not feel comfortable asking your partner. So you might have someone in your life who'd be open to that also. Okay, somebody said, thank you so much for this discussion. I look forward to reading your book. Oh, thank you. I hope you find the book really helpful. And you're welcome. I know it's 3:27 and this is supposed to wrap up at 3:30. I could stay on, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. But if people do have questions, you can email me at julie@chronicillnesstruths.com and I will try and answer questions or point you to resources or whatever I might be able to do.
Julie, there was one question in the question and answer box that asked about giving a website that they thought was your blog. You mentioned your blog, but do you still have the blog? And is the website now just the chronic illness one?
So I have the blog, but like I said, I blog anonymously, so I'm not talking about the specifics here.
So someone had asked. Okay, so I just
no, that's totally fine to ask, but I'm not going to answer.
Yeah.
That's the one question I won't answer.
Okay.
It's important to me to keep it that way.
Well, thank you.
I wasn't able to find the link for the chronic pain group, but look up Arlington, Massachusetts Chronic Pain Support Group, and hopefully you all can find it if that's what you're looking for.
And I just want to speak for the library. I don't know of any chronic pain groups off the top of my head, but we certainly would be happy to help anyone here who is running into stumbling blocks about finding one. We will do our best to search them out as well. So.
That's
But Julie, wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, your expertise. I know it's been well received by our attendees. And again, the book's available at the library. We have a copy here. And Julie had given you links to some online sources for the book as well. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. And thank you all for attending. And we're going to be signing off now. Thank you. Bye-bye.